Okay. Um, Hello, everyone. My name is Vanessa Conte. I'm happy to be here to talk about the work of artists whom I've admired for many years, as well as my own. I've really enjoyed watching the talks that are part of this series and was very honored to be invited this spring. So as you'll see in this talk, I'm not really going to make a linear description of my progress as an artist, but I will start out with some women whose work has influenced me over the years, but also very importantly at a formative time when I started painting as an undergraduate. So I'll start with that and then talk about artists whose work I've repeatedly gone back to for inspiration and whose practices has really have taught me in retrospect the most important things about being an artist for me. And then at the end, I'll go into some work that I've been making more recently. So in this first slide, I have the work of two artists, Lisa Yuskavich and Susanna Coffey, whom I'd met in my first semesters as an undergraduate at NYU. They taught me, of course, a very rigorous technical practice of oil painting, and it got me just viscerally interested in the medium at a time when I was, just starting to make art in the public. Right, I think a lot of us had our first public experiences making art in college or in school. But I also found out from them that I could make art about my body. And the reason I say this is because they made work about their bodies. In the painting on the left, Bad Habits, Lisa, although she made clay models of figures, these were all kind of sculpey maquettes that she made. They're probably 6 inches tall, and she'd set them up and light them, and she had us do the same. But each of these figures actually has a lot of physical characteristics of her, and emotional. She said emotional characteristics of her. And on the on the right, you can see Susanna Coffey's image. She is an artist who I believe teaches mostly at the Chicago Art Institute, but we were lucky to have her for a few semesters. She lived in New York. She probably still does, and has been painting self portraits one a day for decades. And on her Instagram, actually, I think she posts one a day now on her Instagram, and the time ranges from the 1970s until now. So it's a beautiful account. You should check it out. But autobiography was something that I hadn't really contended with as a real serious form of art when I was, as a young person. Even though that's actually what we're all making art about, I believe, at that age. But what Lisa would tell us was that we had to make something that was embarrassing, right? She just instilled in us this value of, if you're going to put something on the wall, it better be something that was risky for you personally. And this kind of mandate of honesty and intimacy was something that, of course, appealed to everybody as a 19-year-old. But to me at the time, it was a special kind of challenge. During that same semester, I had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So my entire life was kind of turned upside down, but it gave me this new body awareness that I could luckily at the moment explore in my artwork. And I look back and I think that that was probably one of the most fortunate things that had happened to me, despite the fact that I was super angry, not that fearful, but it allowed me to make a lot of bad art, mostly sculptures at the time. I made some good paintings, though, that were I wish I had images of those. They have a lot of animals and women interacting in ways that I wish I had kind of continued to make after my undergraduate years. So the stakes for me for making anything were a lot higher, I felt, and I was highly encouraged by these women to just risk everything. Something else, these are the works of Paula Rego, who I'll go into in a second, but something else that I don't have an image of, but someone from this symposium had given a few suggestions, were these small format comics that were sold in the subway stations. And the reason that I'm mentioning these is because they were one of the only kind of cultural products or comics that I had come in contact with. I never really was interested in comics. They were always more for like boys, or we're talking about subjects that I didn't think I was interested in at the time, or at least the format of them was something that didn't really resonate with me. But these little comics were sexy and funny and cheap and intimate. I just like that anybody could just, roll up to the kiosk and look at a comic about, a woman turning into a wolf that was pissing on the ground, and then she would go have sex with three people and kill them. And it was great. And they had this titillation for me that I never thought I could explore with painting, but I held on to, obviously, until later on in my life. But the most exciting work for me that I saw, I'll show you today. One of the artists, she died last year, actually, Paula Rego, Portuguese artist born in 1935. She made a lot of large scale historical paintings, but I'm showing these because they are her first pastel drawings that were large in scale. They're about 47 by 62 inches. And the reason that I I love them so much is because, first of all, the bodies of these women reminded me of my own body, kind of muscular. And I felt, obviously, at the time, it was 1996. It was the same time I started painting, and they were just like not like the fawning femininity that you would see in something like surrealism, which I think is a lot of our. If you go to school in a Western country, surrealism is one of like the first times that sexuality is explored so openly in the 20th century in the history of Western art. And it was of course a very, it's an incredible period of history to study, but though the femininity that was shown at the time, I couldn't really connect to, or what was being created. Plus it was all through the eyes of men. And to see a female artist depicting a kind of raw, vulnerable body, that was part animal. The title of these drawings are "The Dog Women." They're from 1994. And they're funny, and they have a kind of a sexuality that isn't directly sexual, or what we consider like heteronormative, sexy, demure woman. These women dogs are carnal, right? And you can see that in the gesture of the drawing as well as the scale. And I really liked the ability, like kind of the economy of image making here, because I wanted my paintings and my drawings to have this economy of a singular body in a context that told a complex emotional story. And so Paula Rego became very important to me, and I'll go back to her later on. At the same time, I actually just down the street from the Marlborough Gallery where I saw the Paula Rego paintings was an artist called Hilary Harkness being shown at another large gallery, Mary Boone. And she, I believe, when she had her first show with Mary Boone, was fresh out of her graduate degree program at Yale. And the reason I'm showing her work is because, well, probably pretty obvious to you, but at the time in the 90s, to have a young artist take on, well, Nazism, sex, autobiography, humor, all in one painting that was only 20 by 27 inches was a big deal. Like, it was something from outer space. I didn't know if she was a comic book artist that became a painter. She was mixing all of these genres together, and being autobiographical at the same time. So it was a really wild production, like something that I'd never seen anyone make. It was bold and intimate at the same time, and there was this tenderness and ruthlessness that this combination that I really liked. I never really looked at her work a lot after that until recently. But I realize now that it made more of an impression than I had thought it would at the time. In a recent interview, she describes this painting as one of her darker themed works. She called it a theme of collaboration as well, which is kind of an interesting way to look at the Nazis. But she did also say that it was a relief to paint a controversial subject with a layer of sexuality and comedy and silliness to it. But looking back, I don't know if she says herself that she doesn't know if she would have depicted something potentially so sensitive in a way that could seem glib to someone who takes the topic very seriously. But nonetheless, taboo or not, maybe even today it would be considered something you shouldn't paint about. But it has an edge to it that really resonated with me at the time. An artist whose work I came to later in life when I was living in Germany was Dorothy Iannone, who's actually an American artist. Also died last year, born in 1933 in Boston. You can see that this is a photograph of a catalog I got for a show that that was mounted in Vienna. And you can see that this page depicts a painting, a pretty large painting, that shows erotic, blissful sexual acts in ways that you might say are borrowed from Japanese or Tibetan art or West African art. So it has this, even though it has like these other cultural references, in terms of the West, it seems pretty comical and bold and brazen. These are all portraits of herself in sexual acts, herself as a goddess, her sexual partner as kind of this lion god. And it was a way of painting, or a topic of art that I had never seen any woman be as bold with before. She was pretty much ignored and censored in the US until 2009 at her retrospective, I believe, at the New Museum. And the euphoria and graphic, sexual, kind of like visual diary elements of the work were incredible to me. And I thought this definitely fulfilled that mandate of my teachers, right, who told me in the 90s to be bold. And throughout my whole career, I've kind of looked back and looked for these artists who would take something on that was really intense. And most of them were censored, and so I thought that this was something kind of excellent about her career. And not that I want to be censored; I think I already am censored, but I feel that she finally got her recognition in a limited way, I suppose. But you can see that she included also text in her painting. So these weren't, but she made a lot of books as well. She made cards, she made posters, but she included text in her artwork in a way that I feel was kind of equal to the role of the image. And she was speaking to her partner, so the male figure and the animals. She was speaking equally. I think she sees herself and her partner as equal to the beasts, or at least proposes that in a quote here. If you look in this yellow circle, she says, "And if you ate me and I ate you, being both leonine, would that not be a feast to satisfy someone like you and someone like me? All we lack is the courage to bring out our ultimate beasthood, something we're both looking for, right?" So this kind of direct question or interrogation or self-questioning about who we really are and exploring our bestial innate nature was also something else that I really wanted to do with my work, but hadn't really seen how. This kind of proposition of a blissful connection between sexuality and nature was also something I was very interested in. Uh, like I said earlier, I was never really interested or educated in comics. I didn't really read them. I had a brother, but he never really read them either. And the first time that I came across the work of Aline Kaminsky-Crumb was probably 2012 or 2013. I was looking for, women who made work about their sexuality, and obviously she's someone who took on lots of themes, and one of them was sexuality. And I wanted to see how comics in the traditional sense laid out a story that combined concrete linear narrative with sequential drawings. It was just a foreign genre to me, but something really fascinating because I'd never really considered myself a storyteller with words. And obviously, Aline is someone who is incredibly talented as a writer. Um, her deadpan way of telling real stories was something I could really relate to. So, sexual acts from her perspective, the way she talks to herself and sees herself through her own words, kind of unraveling self awareness that she has through just mishaps with her body and with other people. Here, obviously, she's having this self-doubt series of emotions through self-doubt and her experiences with this character Weasel, and she shows wide ranges of emotions and just in a limited series of frames. So you can see starting on the right here in the upper left corner all the way down to the lower right, she goes through an emotional and physical transformation that encapsulates many things, right? So you see her compositionally just standing upright, she's cute and she's confident, and by the end you can see that she's like begging to be put out of her misery, and she's just pressed to the bottom of the frame, kind of crushed by this man. um, very titillating. I mean, the fact that she was able to have this kind of discussion on just one of her pages just blew me away. So I took on the challenge of trying to kind of take all of my formal training in painting and singular storytelling or singular image making on a large scale and put it on some pages. I did not want to include any text really because I am not a writer, and I feel that I'm just more versatile and skilled in presenting images. So I had made these around the time where I'd kind of said goodbye to the traditional art world. I thought I'd gone to get another degree in linguistics. I just moved back to the United States and wanted to just reskill and kind of put the art world behind me, so to speak. I did a lot of research studying witness testimony, which tells a story in a very different way. They were really dramatic, though, and inspiring, and I still had this desire to dramatize stories, but I wanted to pick a story that was interesting to me and that, like I've said the whole time, kind of risked things or made something that was autobiographical, but also could relate to people sexually and through their sense of humor, but also kind of shocked. So I was kind of shooting in the dark and wanting to make something that I actually never thought would be exhibited. And at this time, I was also beginning my own explorations with kink through writing, but also through impact play myself. I kind of documented all of my explorations with my own body in terms of endurance and sexuality and humor. If you've ever engaged with kink or BDSM at all, you know that there's a hefty dose of humor involved in that drama. And just the experience of it, I thought, had a lot of meaning for me, physically, emotionally. And since there was a huge legacy of picture making and storytelling related to this combination of violence, endurance, and comedy and sex, I thought I would try my hand at it. And these are the first two drawings that I'd made that were exhibited in a formal context. And you can see that they're graphic, obviously. They're telling the story of a woman named Evelyn Nesbit, who I read about and was inspired to create a story about while I was doing my linguistics dissertation. There was a court case about her and her love triangle, two very famous men. One of those men is the character you see here. And it is true, supposedly, that on their honeymoon, he took her to a castle in South Germany and beat her with a riding crop. I sexualized the story and made it into something that was more transformative than perhaps it had been for the real woman. So this is my fictionalizing of her life. It has nothing to do with what actually happened, but it was just my entree into that world. In the show that these works were in was the work of another artist who I had never heard of before, but you might know who this is. His name is Haru Kaminamio. He's very famous for making drawings just like this, the fetish of the ass, the adoration of the female ass, large, pieces of flesh that crushed the lucky guy underneath. And this complete commitment, I guess I'll call it that, commitment and fetish of being crushed and being completely giving in and surrendering completely to the body is done with such love and tenderness in his drawing. And something that I might talk about later, but that I would like to emphasize here is the technique and the skill of the artist in combination with the subject matter. So this execution of like a tender pencil drawing of a subject that is so brutal, I believe is what hit me most. Besides the fact that it's a singular image, even though it's laid out in book form. So the reason I took these crappy photographs is to show the story that's being told, laid out on the left side of the spread, and then on the right, each individual drawing in this book called Garden of Domina. All of the visual rhyming that is obvious from each image in combination with this beautiful surrendering body at the bottom of every drawing he makes just blew my mind. And the fact that, you know, it could be created into a book for a lot of people to enjoy with the verbal story separate. It's something that inspires me, and I hope to do the same in my next book. These are two drawings that I made in 2019. So just to draw a comparison, or I was trying to, just like Namio, focus on and be committed to not necessarily the one act of, you know, one movement or one still relationship between two bodies, but one interaction. So it's kind of slow, still approach of flesh being impacted and the reaction of that flesh. So in other words, as you can obviously see, the slow motion, the still moments over the rippling flesh, and the dramatic impact of a hard object on soft skin. There are what I think are humorous moments. I include animals in my drawings as kind of comic relief. And then these ridiculous and exaggerated distortions of the flesh. So in my drawings, the body is never destroyed, right? So it's this kind of impossible, enduring flesh that just could take a complete demolishing beating, but can never be destroyed. So this idea of endurance is something that underlies all of my work as well, but is seldom discussed because a lot of attention is paid to the word violence, which I can't ignore the fact that these could be read as like violent acts, but if you can deconstruct it, and I think that's what I was trying to do in the way that Namio makes us look very hard because of his technique, because of the love and the skill involved in making his work. I was inspired to expose and apply all of my drawing skill to kind of slow down the reception of what is considered an intense physical connection between these objects and these bodies, and abstract it. And you can do that with comic format because you can describe different angles and different perceptions of the same action at the same time. And that's another thing that really drew me to the format of comics, is because it involves time, but it doesn't have to be linear. So these are two examples of me trying to be inspired by the slow unraveling of this act. An artist whose work was shown and introduced to me by someone who is a collector of erotic comics, has a huge collection of erotic art from the 20th century, particularly Impact and BDSM. images, showed me the amazing career of Georges Pichard. He is very well known in Europe, and made many, many series in the 1960s and 70s, I believe in the 80s as well. And this particular set of 3 volumes is about the story of Marie Gabrielle. And she goes through a lot, as these images may indicate. And there's the reason that I'm blown away by Pichard's work is just the clarity, obviously the beauty of the drawing and the use of the medium, but the physical intensity of what these bodies go through, what these women go through. And they just, again, they're sturdy. They're not fawning receivers of someone's desire. I mean, yes, they are. Obviously, someone drew them, and we're all absorbing it and enjoying it. But the bodies are just receiving it and absorbing it and giving it back. So I see these works as clearly very sexual and titillating. But I also think that they are kind of a testament to this amazing body that we see. So he has all of his women have the same physical attributes. They're thick, lots of flesh, incredible 60s eye makeup. And he puts them in these extreme positions, but he also composes them very beautifully in all of the frames. So he makes these are the images that I just showed are kind of the lighter of what the women go through, kind of lighter depictions. They go through a lot more, where their bodies are almost pulled to their maximum. But you can see here that he's an incredible master of composition as well. After seeing Pichard's work and the work of a lot of 20th century erotic artists, was I wasn't exposed to a lot of women making stories about sex or comics about sexuality. The paintings that were being made, as I showed you in the 90s and the 2000s, did discuss some sexuality with regard to maybe more gender roles and power. But in terms of describing a personal and kind of blissful and intense physical exploration of the body, I hadn't seen any women making work like that. And I'd asked everyone I knew. And the only book that came to me was The Lost Girls, which is certainly not a bad example. Belinda Gebbe's drawings are very erotic and incredibly colorful and euphoric. I think that they're really funny as well. And they're pleasurable, they're lush, and she has a really singular style that I think that portrays a kind of sexuality that doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but I love how shameless and how direct and how intimate they are. But I was looking for something a bit darker. One of the artists whose work that really inspires me still, and I only have 2 of his books. It's really hard to find his work. I think he only distributes through one dealer in the US called Vasta Books. I believe it's based in New York. I found them at Printed Matter at a book fair here in 2018. And all of his books are collections of his lithography, ink drawings, and watercolors. When I first saw them, they were incredibly shocking. So Vasta also has 1 or 2 of my books. And when I visited them, I said, do you have anything super intense? And they just handed me Reinhard Scheibner's work. And they're completely repulsive in some ways. These are not the most repulsive. He gets a lot more intense, but I'm showing just a little bit of the edginess of his work. You can see this, like the humorous element of this kind of, like crazy glowing fart from this poor slave on the ground that turns into this kind of masked, marauding shadow here. And there's a lot of women or women with penises and men with various body parts. And his complete fantasy life is laid out. And I just love the rawness of his words and his drawings. They're definitely edgy. So if you want to look at his work any more closely, so make sure you have the stomach for it. I have another page here from a book called True Devotion. Here's the cover and the back cover. It is a beautifully printed book that compiles drawings from 2012 to 2015. Something I really like about his work is also this kind of meandering story. You see figures that repeat throughout his lithographs and his ink drawings, and they always have these beautiful lines that connect all of his characters. And we always believe that's him here, his character. He's pretty recognizable in all of his work. One more artist whose work I go back to a lot also, I believe is only online, Elijah Pink. I found this Swedish artist's work on DeviantArt, has a rather large following. I just love how Baroque and humorous his practice is, these kind of incomprehensible exclamations that come out of heavily bound up fleshy bodies. He has a lot of obviously bondage, humiliation, force feeding. This is just one of thousands of images that you can see on DeviantArt, and a lot of repeated use of torn stockings, lots of food being forced into the mouths of these poor tied up individuals, and also domination by very small creatures is another theme that he likes to explore. So there's a lot of humor there, but also a lot of edgy humiliation that I I don't know if I could make work like this, but I definitely identify with this commitment to exposing something that's physically intense, and that shows the body being pressed and squeezed physically into shapes that are impossible. So I'm going to show a few of my own works in the next few slides. I began making work that featured everyday propositions and premises. So again, just like Paula Rego I'd shown you earlier, I didn't want to make work that was campy, like the Pichard books. I felt like there's a lot of that, and I didn't want to kind of pigeonhole the interactions into something that was just, oh, she makes kinky drawings, because I don't think that those power dynamics are limited to the realm of BDSM or erotic comics, for that matter, or erotic themes. I believe these power dynamics exist in everyday experiences. And I wanted to approach those with hyperbole and humor. And hopefully, I didn't know how to really do it at the time. You could see I'm exploring it here in frames like this one and here, some kind of spiritual catharsis, some kind of release, in combination with endurance. So something that couldn't necessarily be labeled as, oh, it's kinky or it's violent or it's sexual, or I just had a few rules that I gave myself. And one of them was repeated physical intensity. So distortions of the body that didn't need any explanation. They had to be intimate, which I think physical intensity and intimacy are usually intertwined regardless of the intention. Submission in the end, and they had to be nonverbal. So I wasn't sure how words could function for me. Again, like I said, I'm certainly not a writer, although I have written a lot of really funny impact play erotic shorts. But I felt that the visuals were where I could really connect with the kinds of physical distortions I wanted to see. So where I start is usually in my mind when I draw is, what do I want the body to do? What kind of shape do I want the body to be in? And how is that going to happen? So I'm always thinking about how the flesh is going to change and how might I reveal something more in showing the distortion of the flesh in some way. This is one page from a larger series, but another theme that I wanted to explore in my work was gangs or groups. So the power dynamics between a group versus an individual and what kind of power got played out among that group. Um, and I like this uncomplicated premise. So I'm from Long Island, a lot of shopping malls, you know, the suburban trope of going to a shopping mall as a teenager, and there being some ridiculous situation of bullying, right? This could also, I mean, something like that you'd see in a chewing gum commercial, for example, like, someone walks into a shop and all hell breaks loose. I just like the idea. What I find funny anyway is some minor infraction or misstep could lead to an outrageous physical consequence, right? To me, that's hilarious. To other people, that might seem scary. It is also scary, but I think that showing the interactions between people with that kind of premise just allows for you to kind of take a side or not. Depending on the time that I look at this drawing, I connect with the main character here in the sunglasses. Her name's Amy. Or I connect with, one of these bullies that's like swinging this paddle. They're clearly ridiculous and ambiguously sexual, depending on, what kind of impact you're interested in. A theme that I explore repeatedly is the theme of mother and daughter, or kind of disturbing combinations of family dynamics and sexuality. That was something I'd seen portrayed many times before by artists of all kinds of backgrounds and gender affiliations. But again, Paula Rego is the artist who approached it in a way that I felt incredibly connected to. And I think it's because she used things like facial expression, posture, the scale of this work, 84 by 84 inches. It's the size of a history painting. And you can see this father who's kind of a puppet in this triangle of matriarchy here, the two sisters and either the housekeeper or the mother. And on the right, you can see the daughter who's dressed as Snow White, if you recognize that fairy tale character, who's being checked. So her mother, her stepmother, is taking off her underwear to see if, she's been up to no good, to see if there's any signs of sexual activity that she wasn't allowed to have. And it has these beautiful postures, kind of awkward postures, this kind of slight humiliation, but at the same time they seem normal, right? They seem like just regular family interactions gone wrong, right? Exaggerated and pointed in a way that makes you sit with them longer. And her ability to kind of foreground these relationships of intimacy and power, again, as I mentioned in the first slides, was really powerful. And your reading of them depends on where the characters are in their lives and who you identify with at the current moment that you read it. I try to play with this a few times, not with the subtlety and skill that Rego does, but I again took the character that I had drawn earlier, Evelyn Nesbit, and here she is with her mother, whose name was also Evelyn. So they had this interesting, kind of complicated mother-daughter relationship that's documented in her biography, but that I borrow from and then completely fictionalize. So this did not happen to Evelyn Nesbit, the person, but it's just my fantasy of what their home life was like. The testimonies in the biography, as I said, describe a complex relationship of power between Evelyn and Evelyn. So I was really fascinated by the line that I saw, thin line between caretaking and domination. And I became interested in playing with that in my visual storytelling. So without words, what kind of relationship could I set up to propose something that could be loving and dominating at the same time. You can see here that I use the family house as kind of this middle band through line, and this central image of the living room, the family cat, and Evelyn's little brother, and her mom kind of showing her the limits of her own body, let's say, using these irons and some sewing needles. So what's going on behind the walls of this Victorian home is kind of what I wanted to ask in this, also this historical moment of repression and secrecy. I like the idea of kind of a quiet but extreme intensity happening at the same time. Later on, a few years later, I created an exhibition in Cologne. Here is the gallery. And I exhibited 6 drawings, one of which is the one you saw in the shopping mall, where Amy is undergoing some kind of group gang beating by the ladies in the mall. And I continued the story of Amy's life and made 3 paintings for that exhibition that are pretty small. So the painting you see on the left is this small painting in the right corner here. It's 11 by 14 inches. So it's acrylic on wood. And carrying through from the Paul Orrego paintings, I wanted to complicate this idea of caretaking and the modeling of femininity by the mother. So this is mom, if you can't tell already, and this is Amy, the family dog there just hanging out, trying to regularize this or normalize this interaction or morning ritual between a mom and a daughter. It was the first time I had a recurring character among all of these pages, all of these drawings and the paintings. The show was called Up to Your Neck, kind of hinting at the type of situation that Amy constantly found herself in. So through all the pages, Amy interacts very intensely with men, women, trees, and her body is always pushed to its absolute maximum. Here in the 3rd page of the series, Amy is with her parents undergoing a ritual. And I tried to indicate that by this frame here, where you see Amy, who comes home kind of in her tattered clothes. She walks up the stairs on one side and comes down in this ritual pajama with bindings. And undergoes this really kind of ridiculously intense treatment by her parents before they kind of shut her up in her room for the night. I don't know if everyone thinks this is an ambiguous family dynamic, but for me, again, I wanted it to fulfill my rules at the time, which were physical intensity and emotional ambiguity, right? Later in Amy's development, through several pages, I believe this is page 11 of the 12, Amy ends up signing up to be part of the roller derby. And the intensity of group interactions and the power among the players is more literal, and also, I guess, more acceptable in this context. But her collaborations, let's say, with her team members result in extreme distortions of her body, and all of this contact with objects, from skates to the ground to the audience members and other people on her team. So again, this idea of endurance and this transformation from a body that is kind of emotionally in one place, in one part of the drawing, and then resulting in some kind of, I don't want to call it catharsis or some kind of clarity, but the lowest frame is usually one where you see some emotion on the face of Amy. Another painting in that exhibition is a portrait of Amy. It's called The Fool. And because of Cologne's renowned medieval history, I thought it would be fun to make a teary martyr painting of my character. Kind of a wink at martyrdom and emotional fickleness. Why is Amy getting herself into these situations? What is she actually getting out of it, right? Physically and emotionally. So I like leaving that as a question. My most recent work is in these last two slides. They take place, so all of these drawings, there's a series of 27, and they take place in this kind of sci-fi non-space where machines, instead of other humans, are dominating a single female identifying body. And it's more the contrast of textures. There's a lot of extreme perspective you can see here, but these steel bars against the soft flesh, and these kind of exaggerated, kind of exalted moves through space that kind of drag the character into this kind of euphoric space, and then have her ending up like slammed up against the wall. So physical and emotional swings that are extreme. They're less funny. I mean, I don't see them as humorous as the previous work, but more, again, more directly about endurance and how much the body can absorb. Let me go to the second, this is the last slide, where I play a lot more with the manipulation of the flesh and how the flesh can fit and is made to fit and move and grow around the metal, what I consider to be metal or a hard surface. And something else I introduce in these drawings that I have more in my paintings, but will have in later drawings, is this idea of movement. So not just the impact, but the kind of vibration of the flesh and kind of impossible distortion of the body.